Imagine standing in a church on the biggest wedding day of the year, when suddenly, a maid overhears the bride whispering a shocking confession on the phone. She doesn't love the groom at all, she's only marrying him for his millions, and she's already planning how to destroy him. What happens next will turn this perfect wedding into pure chaos, and the revenge will leave everyone stunned. Andrea Silva pressed a damp cleaning rag to her palm and tried to still the tremor in her fingers. The restroom of St. Joseph's Church, cool marble, lemon disinfectant, and the distant perfume of lilies, felt like a vault where sound traveled too far and secrets couldn't help but echo. It was a Saturday morning in Manhattan, the day social media had crowned the wedding of the year. 300 guests and couture had already taken their places under the vaulted ceiling. Somewhere beyond the tiled wall, the organist practiced slow, honeyed scales. Through the cracked restroom door, Andrea caught a sliver of white, a sweep of satin, a spill of veil. The bride paced in front of the mirror, phone pressed to her ear, voice pitched low enough to pretend it wasn't dangerous. "Ryan, baby, you know I love you." The words were syrup and razor at once. The hem of her gown whispered across tile as she turned. "This is business. I'm only marrying Edward for his money." Andrea's breath snagged. She didn't mean to listen, God knew she didn't, but her body refused the command to move. Her mind fired 100 warnings anyway. Step back. Make a sound. Run. Every warning died against the chill of what she heard next. "As soon as I have access to his accounts, and once we have a baby, it'll be easy to get rid of him." A soft, mirthless laugh. 2 years tops. We walk away with everything. Andrea felt the room tilt, the lemon-clean smell turning sour. It wasn't just cruelty, it was choreography. The bride had rehearsed this. She had plans and timelines, a future counted in wire transfers and signatures. Andrea pictured the man waiting at the altar, Edward Valencia, the kind of handsome that made people assume the world had always been kind to him. Maybe it had. Maybe that was why this blade wrapped in white, felt so obscene. $500 million, Ryan. The bride stopped pacing and leaned toward the glass, as if confiding in her own reflection. We disappear after that. A real life. Andrea shut her eyes. Pray, she told herself. Do not faint. When she opened them, movement in the mirror caught her, not the bride this time, herself. The bride's eyes tracked the reflection, then slid, slow and inevitable, to the narrow gap in the stall door where Andrea stood. Silence fell like a lid. The bride ended the call without looking away. She turned, the practiced smile sliding off her face like a glove. Up close she was all precision, sculpted cheekbones, lashes like theater curtains, a beauty that trafficked in obedience. "How long?" she asked, sweetness strained to frost. "Have you been standing there?" I was just cleaning, ma'am," Andrea said. Her voice came out hoarse, smaller than she felt. "I didn't hear." "Liar." The heel clicks were tiny gunshots as the bride crossed the tile. She smelled like peonies and money. From a glittering clutch, she produced a neat stack of cash and fanned it lightly. "How much to keep quiet? 1 grand? 5? Tell me what buys your silence." Andrea looked at the money and thought of her mother's morning cough, of the rent that sat like a dare on the kitchen counter. The bills blurred. She swallowed. "I don't want your money," she said, and she was surprised to find her voice steady now. "But he deserves to know." The bride's gaze sharpened, something feral and ancient waking behind her eyes. "Who do you think they'll believe?" she asked softly. "A respected socialite, or a desperate janitor?" Something in Andrea clicked. Fear had been the first reaction. Now there was only clarity. She slid along the wall, the rag still in her fist, and reached for the door. The bride stepped to block her. Andrea lowered her shoulder, slipped past, and then she was moving, out of the restroom, into the corridor that opened toward the sanctuary, the noise of the organ booming like thunder. She ran. Her sneakers skidded on polished stone as she took the side aisle. Heads turned, feathers, jewels, sleek heads of lacquered hair. A murmur rose and rippled across the pews as if a breeze had entered where it shouldn't. Near the foot of the altar, the priest leaned toward the groom with a patient smile. Edward, tall in a black tux that fit him like a promise, turned at the sudden hush. "Mr. Valencia!" Andrea's voice cracked and carried. Sound did that in churches. It found rafters and moral centers. "Please, I need to speak with you." She heard the collective intake of breath. She saw the collective narrowing of eyes. She felt the collective weight of rules she was breaking and names she didn't carry. But then she saw Edward's face, open and puzzled, not cruel, and courage steadied. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone even, a man inclined to fairness. "It's about your bride," Andrea said. Words tumbled breathless. "She doesn't love you. I heard her. She said she's only marrying you for your money. She has a man, his name is Ryan, and a plan to—" Andrea choked on the final verb, tried again. "To take everything." The sound the room made then was alive, shock muttered into awe curdled into hostility. Guests craned, pearls and cufflinks flashing, phones half lifted before shame pulled them down again. A woman in a hat clucked her tongue. A man in a navy suit shook his head, already drafting a cutting anecdote for brunch. From the nave's far door came motion like a storm, the bride veil floating, face wet with perfect tears. She crossed the aisle and seized Edward's arm. "Edward," she pleaded, and the acoustics delivered her sorrow to every ear. "I am so sorry. She's unstable. She cornered me in the restroom and threatened to ruin our wedding." Andrea stared. The speed of the lie, its confidence and ease, stunned her. But if truth was a slow walker today, it was still walking. "That's not—" "Shh," the bride said, her voice tremulous, an actress asking an audience to hush. "You don't have to be jealous." She pressed her cheek to Edward's shoulder. "She told me she would make up stories because she hates me. Because she's just a janitor." Edward looked from the woman clinging to him, a miracle in white, to the woman standing before him in a navy polo with a spray bottle at her belt. His throat worked. The priest took a small step back. There was kindness in Edward's eyes, and confusion, and a terrible public math that every powerful person learns to do. What's plausible? What's polite? What's safe? "Sir?" Andrea said softer now. She didn't want to beg. She wanted to reach the part of him that had looked at her with fairness. "Please!" She said his name. "Ryan." She said 2 years. She said a baby to bind you. Edward's jaw flexed. He was listening. He was also drowning. He flicked a glance toward the ushers at the aisle's edge and gave the smallest nod. The security men moved with that quiet competence that children of rich churches learned to find reassuring. One took Andrea's elbow with a grip that wasn't cruel, just final. The other gestured toward the doors. "Ma'am, you're making a mistake," Andrea said, louder now because she had to leave something ringing in this room that wasn't the organ. "She will ruin you. Please escort her out," Edward said, the gentleness gone from his voice because gentleness would have felt like permission. The bride turned her face into his shoulder and let out a broken sound that read as love to anyone eager to read it that way. Andrea didn't fight. She couldn't, not here, not within the thin line where righteous became spectacle. She lifted her chin as they walked her down the aisle. The guests parted like water, leaving a bright, clean path to the doors. Some couldn't help themselves. They whispered anyway. At the threshold she turned, just once. The sanctuary, drenched in white blossoms and soft light, looked like the inside of a promise. The man at the altar looked like someone who wanted very badly to believe promises. Andrea thought of her mother's hands, chapped and warm, and of every time life had dismissed them as less. She thought of the bride's voice in the mirror, low and cold. "One day you'll pay for this," Andrea said under her breath, not a curse but a vow. The organist began the processional, the same melody as always, dressed in someone else's joy. The great wooden doors swung shut, heavy as a verdict. Outside, the city's summer light felt too bright, too clean for the truths she carried. On the church steps, Andrea stood alone with the rag still clenched in her fist. Her heart hammered. Her legs felt rubbery. But the fear had burned down to a single coal of certainty. The truth was real. It was ugly and it was hers, and if the people inside that church insisted on worshipping a lie, then she would find another altar for the truth to stand on. She drew a breath that tasted like hot concrete and jasmine from a street vendor's bucket. Somewhere, a bus hissed. Somewhere, a camera clicked. Andrea tucked the rag into her pocket like a relic, squared her shoulders to the avenue, and started down the steps, away from the door that had rejected her, toward the city she'd have to convince. On Monday morning, the lemon shine of St. Joseph's floors could have served as a mirror, but no one met Andrea's reflection. Her supervisor waited by the sacristy door with a sealed envelope and a face like bad weather. "Andrea, we're going to have to let you go," she said without lifting her eyes. "Some parishioners felt uncomfortable about Saturday." "I've cleaned this church for 2 years," Andrea replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Never missed a shift. The decision's been made." The envelope, "Final pay, no thanks," was pressed into her palm like a note of apology that didn't say sorry. Thus began the slow grind: subway rides to interviews, polite smiles across plastic nameplates, nods at her years of experience, and then, always, the phone calls. Managers stepped into hallways and came back with closed faces. "We're going in a different direction. We'll keep your resume on file." 4 times. 6 times. 10. By the 12th, Andrea could tell from the way a receptionist said hello that the answer would be no. A friend from a cleaning crew tugged her aside in a service corridor that smelled of bleach and fryer oil. "You crossed the wrong woman," she whispered. "That bride, Madison Vale, she has people. She's calling around, saying you're unstable. Jealous. Liar." Andrea's stomach dropped, but it wasn't surprise, it was recognition. Money didn't just buy things, it bought narratives. At home in the Bronx, her mother started pausing halfway up their 4th-floor walk-up, palm pressed to her sweater. "I'm fine," Maria insisted, breath thin as thread. "Keep moving." She wasn't fine. One afternoon, the cough turned to a clutch. Andrea grabbed a rideshare and a prayer. In the fluorescent quiet of a cardiology clinic, a doctor with kind eyes pointed at a skin that glowed like a bad moon. "Severe coronary artery disease," he said gently. "She needs bypass surgery. Soon." "How soon?" Andrea asked. "As soon as possible." "How much?" 40,000, he said, and watched the number hit her like a crosstown bus. "There are programs, but the public wait list is long. Months, potentially years." He didn't finish the sentence. "Your mother doesn't have years in this condition." Andrea cried in the bathroom where the paper towel dispenser hiccuped out stingy squares. In the mirror, the woman looking back at her already knew the answer. She would try anyway. She tried banks. Marble lobbies and brushed steel desks. Men with beards trimmed like hedges. Women whose smiles were all upper lip. Lone purpose? Medical. Employment? Freelance hourly. Collateral? Silence must have seemed like a joke. The third banker didn't even bother with sympathy. "I'm sorry. We can't approve that." She stepped out into midtown wind and collided with perfume, shopping bags, and a pair of stilettos that could impale a heart. "Madison." "Well, look who it is," Madison said, the words warm, the tone winter. She didn't step aside. She pivoted, projecting for the lobby's audience. "How's the little liar?" Andrea moved to slip around, but Madison ghosted with her, gaze raking Andrea's thrift store coat. "You threatened to ruin the happiest day of my life," she said, loud enough to bounce off the ATM. "And for what? Envy?" Andrea could feel people watching, guards, tellers on break, a woman in exercise gear pretending not to stare. "Please," Andrea said quietly. "Let me pass." Madison sighed as if burdened by her own generosity, then pulled a fan of crisp bills from her designer bag and let them flutter to the floor at Andrea's feet. "Buy your mother something nice," she cooed. "I'd hate for pride to get in the way of medicine." Humiliation hit hot, and then drained away, leaving something clean. Andrea looked at the money, then at Madison, and shook her head. "Keep it," she said. "You're going to need it." Madison's smile thinned. The heels clicked away, leaving a small circle of silence where outrage should have been. That night, anger distilled into decision. Andrea found a wigmaker on 125th who paid cash for long, healthy curls. "1,000, the woman said, fingers gentle but efficient as she braided, snipped, bundled. Andrea watched ropes of her identity fall into a tray and felt oddly light. At a discount optician, she chose square frames that made her cheekbones look sharper. She dyed what hair remained a darker brown in a bathroom sink and cut it close with trembling hands. The scale dipped down over weeks, stress and diner coffee doing what diets never had. In the mirror, a different woman stared back, leaner, older, unsentimental. On a job board stapled to a cork wall in a laundromat, she saw a posting, Valencia Holdings, custodial, morning shift, experience required, discretion essential. Park Avenue address. Pay above table. "Mom," she said, bringing the number to the kitchen where Maria dabbed ointment on cracked knuckles. "I have to try. They'll recognize you," her mother whispered. Andrea touched the new line of her jaw. "They won't." Valencia Tower rose like a sermon to money, gold-letter name at the revolving doors, lobby orchids tended like royalty. The facility's office smelled of coffee and floor wax. A woman with a straight spine and a Bronx cadence introduced herself. "Carmen Diaz. We do things right here, or we don't do them at all." She slid Andrea a bucket, gloves, and a clipboard audit. "Show me your corners." Andrea did. She cut old gum from under a conference table, lifted dust where trim met carpet, hit the baseboards, the vents, the places that get missed because they're designed to be. Carmen checked boxes as if scoring a recital. "You're quiet," she said finally. "I've learned to be," Andrea answered. "Good. You'll work the 15th. Executives. You don't exist unless spoken to. Copy? Copy." In the elevator, Carmen talked shop. Vacuum lines angled the same direction. "Use citrus on the executive hall, not pine. And for God's sake, don't move the CO's pens. He notices." The doors slid open on plush, a hallway that swallowed shoes. Andrea stepped out and the elevator chimed again behind her. Another passenger joined them in the vestibule. Edward Valencia. Up close, he was less magazine cover and more person, taller than she remembered, a faint crease at the temple that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Grief or growth, sometimes they looked the same. "Good morning," he said, offering the gentle nod New Yorkers reserve for people who share their building but not their lives. "Good morning, sir," Andrea replied, dropping her gaze to the caddy. The new voice, lower, flattened, did its job. Still, a flicker crossed his eyes, the feeling of a word on the tip of the tongue. "You're new?" he asked as the doors whispered open again. "Yes, sir." "Welcome. If you need anything, Carmen runs a tight ship." The ghost of a smile. "In a good way." He moved down the hall, and Andrea let herself breathe for the first time since the lobby. She started with the boardroom, coasters aligned, remotes nested, traveler mugs swept away by evening crews mysteriously reappeared by morning. On a side credenza, a framed photo caught the light, Edward and Madison frozen at the end of the aisle, grins telegraphing a happiness that had already filed for bankruptcy. Andrea set it back exactly as she'd found it, and then saw, half hidden behind a leather folio, a second frame face down. Habit made her write it. In the glass, Madison leaned into a different man, a dark-haired guy with a smirk that wanted applause. His hand rested a little too low on her waist to be family. On the mat board someone had scrawled with a silver pen, M+R, Montauk, 2023. Andrea turned the frame over again, palms suddenly slick. She wasn't imagining things. The name in the restroom, the laugh like dry ice, Ryan was real, and so was the timeline. She finished the boardroom and made her way to Edward's office last, letting the vacuum's thrum steady her pulse. His desk was immaculate, calculator aligned to the notepad, fountain pen parallel to the keyboard. The obligatory wedding photo faced visitors, Madison's veil haloed, Edward's eyes crinkled with a trust that made Andrea want to switch off the lamp and let him sleep until truth could wake him more gently. Tucked behind the frame, there was a sliver of glossy again. She eased it out, the same Montauk shot, this time with a different inscription on the back, R+M. Our real life. Heart drawn as carelessly as the promise. Andrea put everything back exactly, every angle measured by memory. She wiped the fingerprints she hadn't left. At lunch, she ate a turkey on wheat in the service pantry with Carla Reyes, the assistant whose to-do lists were symphonies of color-coded tabs. Carla was friendly in the way of people who needed to be but chose to do it well. "Welcome to the 15th, she said, passing Andrea the good sugar packets. "If you ever need to hide, the copy room is Switzerland." Andrea smiled. "Thanks. Don't mind Mrs. Vale when she breezes through," Carla added in a low voice. "She's particular." "That a diplomatic word?" Andrea asked. "It's the only kind we're allowed," Carla said, and made a face that was treasonous enough to be funny. That afternoon, Madison arrived with the weather of a person who believed the climate obeyed her. She dismissed a courier with a flick, rearranged a vase because the roses didn't understand balance, and announced to no one, "This place needs standards." Andrea kept moving. When Madison's phone call rolled through the hall. "Ryan, he's signing something this week." Andrea's spine listened while her mop feigned disinterest. At 5, Carmen signed Andrea's timesheet. "You do good work," she said. "Don't get involved in any soap operas." "I'm allergic," Andrea replied. But as she rode the elevator down, the city rose in her like an answer. She thought of Madison's bills on the bank floor, of Maria's palm pressed to her sweater, of the look in Edward's eyes when he almost recognized something he didn't know he'd lost. Andrea had stumbled into a story once before and been thrown out of it. This time, she would write down the facts. She would keep the edges sharp. She would be careful. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a reminder: pick up heart meds, message the charity clinic about a payment plan, check the wigmaker's address for a touch-up trim. She silenced it, and, with a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, pulled out her own little item of contraband, the Montauk photo she'd slipped from the frame when no one was looking. She'd already taken a crisp shot and returned the original to its place. This print was for her wall at home, a map that proved the country called Truth existed, even if no one sold tickets there. She slid the copy back into her bag and stepped onto Park Avenue. The Valencia name glowed behind her in gold. Ahead, the city's traffic hummed like a promise kept by movement alone. Andrea tucked her chin against the wind, and for the first time in months, determination felt bigger than dread. Andrea learned the choreography of the 15th floor in a week, the cadence of footsteps, the doors that sighed versus the ones that snapped, the way voices softened when Edward was near and sharpened when Madison arrived. She moved like airflow, present, invisible everywhere. Monday, 9:42 a.m., the first fracture, Madison's voice sliced down the corridor. "Carla!" "Now." Carla Reyes, headset around her neck, hustled in with a notebook. "Yes, Mrs. Vale? You didn't send the car yesterday." Carla blinked. "You told me not to, at 2:14 p.m., right after lunch." "I wrote it down." Madison's hand hit Edward's credenza, a crisp clap. "Don't invent things to cover incompetence." The elevator chimed. Edward stepped out mid-tension, removing his gloves. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Madison said brightly, the mask snapping into place. "Just coaching." Edward's eyes went to Carla's glassy stare. "Take an early lunch," he told her gently, then lowered his voice to Madison. "We've talked about yelling at staff." "Oh, so we're defending employees now?" she breathed, brittle smile never touching her eyes. "I'm asking for respect," he said even. He looked like a man who hated public scenes and kept careful inventory of private ones. From the supply alcove, Andrea wound a cable around the vacuum and filed everything, tone, posture, the shape of a lie, into the cabinet in her head labeled evidence. At 12:08 p.m., Madison swept into the elevator with a flurry of silk and impatience, phone already at her ear. "Andrea, wiping the chrome panel, caught the name as the doors slid shut. Ryan. Tonight. That evening, rain needled Midtown. Madison didn't use her driver. She flagged a cab, changed direction twice, and checked over her shoulder like a woman who understood cameras. Andrea took the following taxi, keeping distance, offering the driver a plausible line. My boss left a folder in her purse. The trail ended under the gold canopy of the Plaza Hotel. Madison paused, scanned, then drifted through the revolving door. Andrea waited 5 minutes, folded her damp city into poise, and entered. The lobby was a living museum of money. Andrea became background, asking the host about job openings, lingering near the bar, choosing a two-top with sight lines but not attention. She didn't have to wait long. Madison emerged from the elevators wearing a different expression, the one people save for accomplices. The man who met her fit the Montauk photo exactly, mid-20s, tailored without taste, a smile that asked for credit. Ryan Cooper. They chose a shadowed banquet. Andrea watched their hands before their faces, how they met and didn't separate. I'm tired of pretending, Madison murmured, twisting her straw, eyes glittering in the bar's low light. He double-checks everything. I need him to move fast. Create a rush, Ryan said, casual as weather. Family emergency. A can't-miss investment. Anything that forces a wire without scrutiny. And after? You'll file, he said, stroking her wrist. If he resists, we make sure he doesn't. Andrea's phone sat face down on her knee. She slid the camera up, thumbed the exposure, and captured 2 frames, grainy dark, but them. Proof didn't have to be pretty, it had to be true. Go up first, Madison said, standing. 8:15. Same rules. Ryan saluted with his glass, a man who thought manners were currency. Andrea left 10 seconds after him, drifted past the concierge, and out into rain sharpened by taxi spray. She didn't look back. Tuesday dawned with the clean light Manhattan sometimes grants the penitent. Andrea arrived early, as she did now whenever her nerves needed head starts. In Madison's corner of Edward's office, a curated nest of chargers, glossies, and a monogrammed pen, she heard heels, then the whisper of paper. Andrea slipped into the copy room, waited, counted to 45, and returned when silence reclaimed the hallway. The trash basket beneath Madison's credenza held a confetti of ripped planner pages. Andrea tipped the bin, sifted quickly, store receipts, a lipstick box, then a torn strip of cream stock with narrow-ruled lines and a tiny gold V in the corner. Scrawled in quick shorthand. Our Plaza 6P, transfer Thursday docs, attorney. Andrea photographed it, returned every scrap to its precise disorder, and wiped the rim of the bin with a fresh towel. No fingerprints either way. At 8:57, Edward appeared at his door, phone pressed to his ear. Dr. Mendez, it's Edward Valencia. Yes. She signed the updates. Are we fully insulated? A pause. Andrea kept her back turned and her ears open. Good. Monday works. Thank you. He ended the call, stared a moment at the wedding photo on his desk, then turned it face down with a small, decisive movement. Something is moving, Andrea thought, not just theirs. Wednesday brought the small kindnesses that kept Andrea loyal to her own project. In the pantry, Carla handed over the good coffee pods with mock secrecy. Executive contraband, she whispered. Carmen signed Andrea's time sheet with a hard nod. Corners sharp. Nice. Those 2 women were a ballast against the upstairs weather. Madison arrived late, tempest tucked into couture. She found fault with a floral arrangement, then with a seating chart for a charity gala. My table is not adjacent to the councilman's, she snapped. Fix it. Of course, Carla said, already typing, already swallowing what she shouldn't have had to. Andrea passed with a broom. Madison's gaze snagged on her for a fraction too long, something curious, then dismissive. Andrea considered the new haircut, the glasses, the weight loss to worry. The disguise held. At 3:36, Madison slipped back into Edward's office when he stepped out for a call. Carla, from her desk, watched Madison sit at the computer, enter credentials, and work very quickly. 6 minutes later, Madison emerged with a slim black folder tucked under her arm and a smile that looked like a seam pulled too tight. Edward returned as she glided past him. "Everything okay?" he asked, polite instinct. "Family thing," Madison said, brushing his lapel. "I'll explain at dinner." Andrea felt the temperature drop 5 degrees. At quitting time, she took the long way out through the garage. In the dim light, Madison paced between an Escalade and a column, phone pressed so hard to her ear it might have fused there. "We did it," she hissed, joy beating under control. "He signed the updates, the permissions, everything. 1 week, and it's done." Fuse lit, Andrea thought, skin prickling. She had the grainy bar photo, the ripped note, the overheard names, the patterns. It wasn't enough to arrest, it was enough to warn. But warnings had failed before, in a church that echoed with music instead of truth. That night, Andrea laid everything on her tiny kitchen table, the printed snapshots, the planner fragment, the dates and times she jotted on sticky notes, and receipts. Maria shuffled in her robe, breath even but thin, and rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You look like your father when he fixed the old radio," she said. "Patient. Stubborn." Andrea smiled small. "He always said if a thing isn't working, you don't kick it, you listen for the loose screw." "What do you hear?" Maria asked. "A clock," Andrea said. "And it's almost midnight." Thursday would prove her right. Thursday arrived with a brittle, cloudless sky, the kind New Yorkers call good weather, because it doesn't get in the way. On the 15th floor, it felt like the air itself had been ironed. Andrea clocked in early, ran a dry cloth over chrome sheet already polished, and listened to the building's hum for the sound of something about to break. By mid-morning, the break began. Madison glided in late, too composed. She didn't bark orders, didn't rearrange the roses. She made a slow loop of the hallway like a shark learning a new tank, then ghosted into Edward's office while he was downstairs with legal. From her desk, Carla watched Madison pull the chair tight to the keyboard and wake Edward's computer with practiced keystrokes. The monitor's light skated across Madison's face as she typed, quick, deliberate. 6 minutes. A click, a print, a slim black folder slid into her tote. Madison stood, smoothed her dress, and left a faint citrus and vanilla wake behind her. Andrea met Carla's eyes across the doorway. The assistant's hands trembled on the stapler. "What did she do?" Andrea murmured. Carla swallowed. "Something she shouldn't." Edward returned at noon with takeout cups and the look of a man trying to keep timelines from colliding. "Everything okay?" he asked automatically as Madison brushed past him. "Family emergency," she said, light and breathy. "I'll explain at dinner." A touch to his lapel, a kiss aimed at onlookers rather than him, and she was gone. At 12:11 p.m., Edward set the coffees down and sat at his desk. Andrea, pretending to dust a bookshelf in the corner, felt the moment the floor dropped an inch beneath his chair. He stared at the screen. The color left his face. "Carla," he said, voice suddenly thin. "Did Madison use my computer this morning?" Carla stood. "Yes, sir." "For a few minutes." Edward's fingers flew. Mouse. Password. Banking portal. A page refreshed. He closed his eyes, opened them again as if the numbers might change. "She wired 500,000, he said too calmly. "From the operating account. Overseas." He punched a number. "This is Edward Valencia. I need to cancel a transfer made today." A beat, and then anger bit through restraint. "Processed when?" Another beat. 10 minutes ago. He lowered the phone, knuckles white, and looked at the framed wedding photo face down on his desk, as if the picture could feel the shame he finally let himself admit. "Sir?" Carla said, voice unsteady. "There's more." He looked up, bracing. "You asked me to keep an eye out. Yesterday I followed her, just far enough to see. She wasn't meeting family. She was at the plaza with a man." Carla held out her phone, a grainy photograph of Madison and Ryan in a shadowed booth, fingers linked. For a moment, the office held only the sound of recycled air and the microscopic whine of fluorescent tubes. Andrea felt it, too, the way grief and fury can arrive together and sit, heavy, on either side of your chest. Edward spoke without looking away from the photo. "Send Andrea up." Andrea stepped into the office on legs that remembered a church and a pair of closing doors. Edward stood with his back to the window, Manhattan bright beyond him like an accusation. He looked older than he had at 9 a.m., something about the way his shoulders squared against a blow he couldn't duck. "Andrea," he said. "No. Ms. No distance." "Sit." She sat. "Carla tells me you knew Madison before you worked here." Not a question. "I did," Andrea said softly. He exhaled, a rough sound. "You were the woman at the church." Andrea nodded. "I tried to warn you. I had you thrown out." His mouth twitched, not humor, something like self-disgust. "I told myself I was protecting her. Protecting us. She's very good at making lies feel noble," Andrea said. "Good people fall for that." Edward braced his hands on the desk and bowed his head, a prayer without words. "She stole $500,000 today," he said. "Her phone's off. The penthouse is empty. I've lost the money. I've lost." "You haven't lost yourself," Andrea said. He looked up. There was a different light in his eyes, pain, yes, but also the first spark of something that might become resolve. "I want the truth out," he said. "Not just for me. I want the city to see who she is. No more hiding." "Then we don't chase her in the dark," Andrea said. "We turn on the lights." He frowned, curious despite himself. "How?" "She worships status," Andrea said. "So we use a temple she respects." She laid the ripped planner scrap on his desk. "Thursday. Transfer. Documents. Attorney. She's been staging this for weeks. If she thinks you're still pliable, hurt, but pliable, she'll come back to finish the con. Or at least to spin the narrative." Edward's jaw worked. "She called it a family emergency. She'll expect me to be sympathetic." "Be that," Andrea said. "To a point. And make it public." He studied her, the corners of his mouth tightening in the closest thing he had to a smile right now. "You're asking me to stage a scene. I'm asking you to stop letting her pick the stage." He nodded once, decision settling in his posture. "If she calls, I'll ask to meet. Someplace she loves. Someplace full of eyes." Carla hovered at the doorway, a witness to the pivot. "Sir, if we're doing this, I should loop legal," she said. Quietly. "We'll want records." "Loop them," he said. Quietly. He turned back to Andrea. "Your mother's surgery," he added, abruptly gentle. "Is it scheduled?" Andrea blinked at the whiplash of compassion. "We're trying to get on a cancellation list." "The money." Edward pulled open a drawer and produced a checkbook, anachronistic and solid. "How much?" "Edward, sir, I can't." "How much?" he repeated, not unkind. 40,000. He wrote, signed, tore the check, and slid it across the desk. "A loan. No interest. Pay me back if you can. If you can't, pay it forward through the foundation." Her hands shook. "I don't know how to." "You already did," he said simply. "You told me the truth when it cost you everything." Andrea felt heat prick her eyes. She hadn't planned on crying in front of him again. She didn't fight it. He looked away, giving her the privacy of his averted gaze. The plan grew muscles over the next few hours. Carla contacted a discreet in-house counsel, who advised documenting everything and avoiding entrapment. She also reached out to Carl Stanton, the investigator, to pull hotel footage from prior weeks and to start a quiet trace on the foreign account. Carmen, sensing weather, moved non-essential meetings off the 15th floor and stocked the break room with bad cookies and better coffee, morale triage. At 3:18 p.m., Edward's cell lit with an unknown number. He didn't answer. At 3:19, it lit again. He took a breath, looked at Andrea across the desk. She gave a small nod, and swiped. Hello? Silence. Then Madison's voice, velvet-threaded with string. Edward? Madison. I know you're angry, she began. I can explain. He kept his tone flat. Explain? Not on the phone, she said quickly. Can we meet? Tonight? He let the pause bloom just long enough for her to worry. Where? Our place, she said. The Whitmore. 8. Fine. Thank you, she breathed, relief so real it startled him. Then a soft click. He set the phone down with care, like it might explode anyway. The room held their eyes, Edward's on Andrea's on the path that had led them here. She'll be at her best in public, Andrea said. Smiles. Tears. The language of innocence. But if she sees me, she'll break, he finished. And show everyone the person she's worked so hard to hide. He stood, the decision fitting him better now that it had a timetable. You'll come? I'll be there early, Andrea said. A table in your line of sight. Not hiding, just present. He nodded. If this goes sideways, we leave, Andrea said. And we go to the police with everything we have. He offered his hand across the desk, not as a boss to an employee, but as a person asking another person to step into something brave with him. Andrea took it. His grip was warm, steady. They broke contact when Carmen knocked and stuck her head in. We good? She asked, code for do I need to evacuate the 15th floor? We will be, Edward said. Andrea spent the late afternoon in motion because stillness felt like panic. She restocked the caddies. She aligned the pens Edward always noticed if they were off by a millimeter. She took the Montauk photo from her bag, her copy, and stared at the careless heart drawn in silver marker on the back. Our real life. She slid it away again and told herself the real life was here, Carla and Carmen doing right because it was right, a man learning, late but sincerely, to believe the truth even when it hurt. At 6:42 p.m., as the sky over Park Avenue turned the color of old coins, Andrea pulled on a clean blouse and tucked her badge away. She checked on Maria by phone. Take your pills, Ma. I'll be late. And stepped out into the evening. The Whitmore's chandeliers would already be lit. The tables would already be taking orders in hushed voices. Somewhere on the Upper East Side, a woman who thought the city belonged to her was rehearsing a performance she had delivered 1,000 times. Andrea slid her hands into her coat pockets and let the cool air burn her lungs just enough to feel awake. No more altars that don't want the truth, she whispered to herself. Tonight we bring it in through the front door. The Whitmore's chandeliers threw warm constellations across linen and glass, the kind of light that made sins look expensive. Andrea arrived at 7:30 and asked for a small table near the back wall, close enough to see Edward's usual corner, far enough to look like any other Thursday night diner. She ordered tea she wouldn't drink and set her phone face down, the screen recording off because they weren't here to trap. They were here to reveal. At 8 o'clock on the dot, Edward walked in wearing a midnight suit and a face that gave nothing away. The maitre d' recognized him and ushered him to the corner banquette beneath a framed black and white of the 1940s bar. He sat with his shoulders square and placed his phone upright on the table, not recording, just there, as if to say I'm not hiding. 8:15. Madison swept through the revolving door like the room belonged to her. Heads turned, habit, not admiration. Up close, Andrea saw the hairline cracks, the eyes too bright, the smile stretched thin. Madison leaned in and kissed Edward's cheek like a camera was watching. Thank you for meeting me, she said, easing into her chair. Where's my money? Edward asked. No preamble. I can return most of it, she said quickly. Some went to travel to hotels. With Ryan? He said, voice flat. For a beat she forgot to breathe. How do you? I know enough. Madison tried on contrition like a borrowed dress. Edward, I made a mistake, she whispered. I was lonely. We were drifting. Ryan took advantage of that. For 2 years? He asked. Before and after the wedding? She reached for his hand. He didn't offer it. Please, she said softly. Don't make a scene. A scene needs an audience, he replied, eyes steady. We have one. She followed his gaze, saw what he meant. Tables pretending not to stare, a society columnist pretending to be off-duty, the owner on the far side of the bar giving Edward a small, sympathetic nod. Madison's smile tightened. She shifted the script. I'm here because I love you, she said. We can fix this. Edward's mouth twitched, not quite a laugh. You wired $500,000 out of my company account to an overseas bank, he said, low enough for only their corner and the two nearest tables. What does fix look like after that? I can explain, she insisted. It wasn't theft. It was a temporary transfer. Without my knowledge? She opened her purse, produced a silver pen, and began to write numbers on the back of the menu. I can have 200 back in 72 hours. The rest is tied up. And the man you met at the plaza? Edward said. He's what, tied up as well? Her head snapped up so fast the earring in her left ear spun. Anger bled through the performance. Who told you that? I don't need to tell you how I know, he said. I need you to tell me the truth. She reached again for a softer register, the one that had worked on bankers and board chairs and priests. Edward, you're hurt, she breathed. I understand. But I chose you. I'm here. Madison, he said, and the use of her name flattened the air. You chose money. You just thought I'd be easier to steal it from than a stranger. Color rose beneath her makeup. That's not fair. It's accurate. Andrea watched the dance from her table. The push, the pull, the way Madison kept searching for purchase on a cliff that no longer offered handholds. At Edward's slight nod, Andrea stood, smoothed her blouse, and crossed the room. Madison saw her, and the last of the varnish peeled. You, she spat, half rising. What is she doing here? Edward didn't look away from Madison. You remember Andrea, he said. She tried to warn me once. I didn't listen. She is obsessed with you, Madison said to the room, louder now, gathering alibis. She infiltrated your company. She pretends to be someone she's not. She's dangerous. Andrea kept her voice calm, almost gentle. I clean offices and I tell the truth, she said. You married one man while planning a life with another. You orchestrated a transfer you called temporary. You told Ryan you'd have a baby to bind Edward and then get rid of him. Madison's composure stuttered. Lies. Andrea tilted her head. You used the word rid in a church restroom with the door cracked. I wish I hadn't heard it. I did. The owner took a discreet step closer, not intervening, just witnessing. A server set down water glasses at a nearby table with exaggerated care, as if the sound might break a spell. The society columnist's pen moved. Enough, Madison said, turning back to Edward. Make her leave. No, he said. We're done pretending. What do you want from me? She demanded, the sweetness gone, the steel finally bare. The truth, he said. And my money. Her features flickered, anger, calculation, fear, back to anger. Fine, she snapped, and the word cracked in the quiet. Yes. I moved the money. I deserved it. Do you know how exhausting it is to play perfect wife to a man whose best quality is numbers on a screen? The room inhaled as one. Andrea saw 3 phones tilt just slightly. The columnist didn't look up. She didn't need to. Thank you, Edward said quietly. For what? Madison shot back. For finally introducing yourself, he said. To everyone. For the first time, Madison really looked around. Faces she recognized, donors, trustees, the chair of the museum gala, watched her as if a mask had fallen and they were deciding whether to scream. Humiliation arrived like heat. Edward, she said, voice wobbling on a new note. Panic? Let's go somewhere private. No, he said. Here's how this goes. You have 48 hours to wire back every cent you can reach. You'll email an admission of the transfer and a statement that you acted without authorization. If you fail to do both, I go to the police and to the board. Either way, we're finished. Her nostrils flared. You can't dictate terms to me. I just did. She looked at Andrea then, pure venom. You did this, she hissed. Andrea didn't move. You did this. Madison grabbed her clutch, knocked her water with emotion, and watched it slosh across the linen like a stain she couldn't control. She stood too quickly, heel catching the chair leg. The stumble cost her a shard of poise she couldn't spare. You'll regret this, she said to Edward, but it sounded less like a threat than a wish. 48 hours, he repeated. She left under a chandelier that never flattered quitters. For a moment, the room stayed hushed, as if sound were waiting for permission to return. The owner approached Edward's table. Mr. Valencia, he said softly. Shall I bring your check? Please, Edward said. His hands were steady now. Andrea slid into the chair Madison had vacated. No one told her not to. Edward let out a breath he'd been holding for 2 years. You okay? She asked. No, he said, honest. But I'm right. They didn't high-five or toast. They didn't need to. The victory, if that's what this was, tasted like clean air after a storm, thin, almost flavorless, but real. The owner returned and, in a gesture that meant more than dessert, placed the check face down and said, It's taken care of. Not charity, solidarity. Edward nodded his thanks. Outside on Lexington, a late train thundered beneath the street, making the sidewalk tremble. They stepped into the night. The city's cold cut through Edward's suit. Andrea offered nothing but company. He glanced sideways. Thank you, he said, for being here. I told you I would be, she said. Now go home. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we start making this official. He looked upward at a window 2 floors above the restaurant where a couple argued in pantomime. Hands, shoulders, door slam, and then back at Andrea. 48 hours, he repeated, to himself this time, as if testing the shape of a countdown. 48, she said. They walked to the corner, not touching, perfectly aligned. Somewhere between the yellow cabs and the gutter steam, a different truth settled in. You can lose a lot and still keep yourself. And sometimes, if you keep yourself long enough, the city hands you back a future that fits. The city didn't explode after the Whitmore. It just shifted. By Monday morning, a wire hit Valencia Holdings for $200,000 with no note attached. Legal memorialized everything: Carla's photo, the timeline, the login audit, the bar meeting witnessed by half of the Upper East Side. Carl Stanton confirmed what Edward already felt in his bones. The rest of the money had been split and laundered through a daisy chain of shell accounts. Recoverable? Maybe eventually. Worth the fight? Edward stared at the figures, then closed the folder. 300,000 is a cheap exit, he said. I'll take the lesson over the invoice. The city took its own lesson. Invitations stopped arriving for Madison Vale. A museum quietly replaced her on a gala committee. A boutique lost her appointment. People who lived by seating charts understood what had happened under a chandelier and decided they preferred daylight. Andrea spent that week at hospitals instead of dining rooms. Edward's check cleared. A cancellation slot opened. Maria Silva was wheeled into a cardiac or with a brave smile and a rosary in her palm. Andrea sat through the longest 4 hours of her life on a vinyl chair that squeaked every time she breathed. When the surgeon finally appeared, he smiled the way only people with honest work to report can smile. She did well, he said. You can see her soon. In recovery, Maria's hand, warm, strong again, closed around her daughter's fingers. You look lighter, she whispered. I am, Andrea said. Back at Park Avenue, Edward called her into his office with the door open, a choice he made on purpose. I have a proposal, he said, chin tipping toward the framed mission statement on the wall. Valencia Foundation, Health, Education, Dignity. You've been running the best parts of this company from a mop bucket, he said. Come do it with a title. Program Director. We can teach budgets and board decks. We can't teach the spine you've shown. Andrea blinked fast. I'm a janitor with a good memory and sharp corners, she said. You're the person I want families to meet when they come here, he replied. Because you know how it feels to be on the other side of the desk. Carmen punched the air in the hallway when she heard. Carla brought cake. Andrea set up shop in a sunlit suite in Hell's Kitchen 2 weeks later, a whiteboard blooming with projects, surgical grants, eviction avoidance funds, night school scholarships. She learned to love spreadsheets because they were just stories with numbers in them. Who needed what, when, and how to make the end in kinder. Edward didn't orbit her office, but their paths crossed naturally, in staff briefings, at site visits, after donor lunches. He was different now, quieter, quicker to ask a second question, ruthless with lies, generous with truth. They set boundaries and kept them. They kept each other honest. 6 months slid by, full of small miracles. A single mom taped a photo of her son's diploma to the foundation's glass. A veteran hugged Andrea so tightly her ribs popped. Maria dropped by on Friday afternoons with pastelitos and unsolicited advice for anyone who'd take it. Drink water, she told the interns. And don't marry a fool. On a late October day when the Hudson looked like hammered copper, Edward leaned on Andrea's doorway, hands in his pockets. Can I tell you something not related to budgets? He asked. You can try, she said, smiling. I think I fell in love with you somewhere between the cardiology ward and the grant tracker, he said, not dramatic, just true. Andrea set down her pen. I was trying very hard not to say it first, she admitted. They didn't slam the door or change the org chart. They spoke to HR, to the board chair, to Carmen, who cried, to Carla, who hooped, to Maria, who pretended to consider and then said yes before he finished asking. They kept what was good and made it formal. A year later, St. Joseph's smelled like lilies again. The sanctuary that had once echoed with Andrea's warning now held her vows. She wore a simple dress that felt like breathing. Carla stood beside her. Carmen sat in the front pew dabbing her eyes with a napkin filched from the reception tasting. Maria, heart steady, raised a hand in blessing that trembled only from joy. Edward's face at the altar said everything the first wedding at this church had tried to counterfeit. They promised ordinary things, patience, partnership, truth, even when truth cost. The priest smiled like a man who had seen both kinds of ceremonies and preferred this one. When the news clip made the rounds, 30 seconds of a bride and groom laughing under the rose window, another screen glow flickered 2 states away. In a small apartment above a nail salon, a receptionist who now signed her emails, M. Vale, watched long enough to recognize what she had thrown away, then pressed the power button and sat in the dark. The quiet there was different from the kind Andrea had learned to love. It didn't clean anything. It only echoed. After the reception, Andrea and Edward walked out into a Manhattan evening that smelled like rain on stone. The city had not changed for them, they had changed inside it. They walked past the side door where security had once ushered Andrea into the heat and noise of doubt. She touched the frame as they passed, a private benediction for the woman she'd been, trembling, stubborn, right. Ready? Edward asked, fingers lacing with hers. For what? For the ordinary, he said. The work. The life. The kind that doesn't need chandeliers. They turned uptown toward the foundation, where Monday would bring more applications, more calls, more chances to make a ledger tell a better story. Truth had cost them both once. Now it paid interest in quiet ways. Letters on a wall, meals in a fridge, a heart that didn't hurt when it climbed the stairs. Sometimes the right thing burns at the start. Sometimes it takes a year, or 2, or more to cool into something you can hold. But when it does, it feels like this. Your mother's laugh in the back row, your boss becoming your partner because he learned, at last, to be the kind of man you believed he could be, and a city that looks exactly the same except for one crucial difference. You fit.